Welcome everyone to the show. My name is James Anthony from the James Anthony Report. This is the James Anthony Report podcast. This whole crazy thing that's got everyone upset on both sides, I figured I would comment on because everyone else is. And because it reminds me of a time about 1,000,000 years ago, I was just out of short pants when a dude who sounded like he's holding in smoke was telling me, Dude, you gotta fight him, dude. Dude, you gotta fight him. He called you a dude. You can't let that go. Dude, he may have a gun, dude. So everyone's on high alert. The whole neighborhood was waiting to see what would happen. I get on my orange-tinted glasses and approach the front steps. And this guy with his arm in his coat, he says, "Hey man, I'm cool. I don't want to fight." And he pulls his arm out. And it's in a sling. He had broken it somehow. We went our separate ways after that, but wow. Things escalated pretty quickly back then. Hey, by a show of hands, how many of you would consider yourselves to be combat hippies? And all 400 million legal American citizens raise their hands for peace, love, and weaponry. Now that that's out of the way, I'd like to clear the air, now that the smoke has settled and the smell of napalm isn't boring into your lungs. Let's have an honest conversation amongst friends on what it means in actual terms to support insert country here. If I said I support Israel, what does that mean? Should I be backed into a corner if asked about any criticism of said country? Do you support the German people's right to live free and prosper? Okay, great. How about that whole World War thing? You still support Germany? Just being real as I can be, I don't envy the job of the president. Any president. I read many of Trump's books, and I have to tell you, the guy is a dynamo. Not unlike Sleepy Joe. Ha ha ha. Looking at you, Karine, the first gay black press secretary. She wanted you to know that, by the way. Now, I know every voter, at least I've been told, can have an opinion, and that we are supposed to question authority. Not merely in ideological terms or because we have the moral high ground, which I don't think we do, but because we're Americans. America. But friends, half of smarts as you get older is knowing your limitations. And I gotta say, I think I'd be hiding under the big beautiful desk right now if given the job to lead this or any country. And so the big news that I'm going to talk about, you all know it, it's old news at this point, but it was that Trump dropped a bomb. A big F-bomb, that is. And one half will say that he's a narcissist for thinking he could have solved this issue between Israel and Iran, and the other half remains under Lockheed and Raytheon, and the Armed Services Committee, the DoD, the CIA. You get my point. To some of you, the brief love affair between the media and Trump after the Operation Tie Up Your Camel meant that he'd somehow caved. As if COVID wasn't an indication of that already, but the other half can just as easily say that the media has never, and I mean never, saw a war they didn't like. Even Vietnam, take that for an example. You're telling me the media didn't influence what had transpired? One way or the other, they get their ratings. You know, I almost decided to call this episode Trump, No War. Biden, Hold My Ice Cream. Because unless you've been living in a bunker these last, 20 or 30 years, covert CIA operations ran unimpeded in the Middle East, creating the destabilization that we've thus far watched unfold in real time. In fact, someone sent me a video of Ron Paul when he said it best in the 2008 presidential debates, aimed at specifically George Bush and a man named Jeb, that in 1953, we installed the Shah, and had we not done so, he posited, maybe 9/11 wouldn't have happened. That's called the long game, my friends. What I find interesting is the sort of flippant, offhand use of the word coup in this country. But not in the context you might think. The coup happened when President Kennedy was assassinated, and since that time, the CIA, for all intents and purposes, have run the Oval Office. It's at this point I need to point out something called the Hegelian dialectic. I'm not recalling at the moment what Hegel is best known for in philosophy, or the branch of philosophy that he's credited with, but this dialectic is called problem, reaction, solution. The government starts something that in turn creates public outcry, to which the government then steps in to save the day. But I don't think that's the case with the bunker-busting bombs in Operation Midnight, whatever the hell. And here's why. Nobody knew this was a real issue that posed an imminent threat. A month ago, you didn't wake up going, man, I'm really afraid of Iranians today, as you sipped your Arabica blend coffee. If it was the case that Trump was furthering some sort of long game plan to step in and save the day, his team didn't really do a good job of building any suspense. Until the very last minute, it was less Stairway to Heaven and more Thunderstruck, if you catch my Tokyo drift. Look, I'm not well versed in the mess that is geopolitics. Go somewhere else for that. But what I do understand is parapolitics from the standpoint of 123 Main Street, and the implications for us in the optics. After the ceasefire agreement was made, Israel didn't look so good to anyone. Iran essentially had surrendered, and then Israel unloaded on them. That's not big Richard energy. That's called being a Richard energy. So if it's all a game to make Israel's agenda, as some claim, come to fruition, well, they're simply wrong. I'll put it this way. I can't go to my neighbor's house, knock on the door, punch him in the suckhole, much as I'd like to, and say, hey, that's for anything you might be plotting in the future, man. No meth lab in this hood. Which is essentially what Israel did in this or that instance. What I can do is help out my friend if he thinks his life is in danger, and I can defend his life if necessary, which is what Trump did. And no, my neighbor can't build a meth lab, which is what Iran did, according to the mainstream. Now, I'm splitting the crowd, and I know that, but I'm splitting the crowd if I say we shouldn't have done this bombing. I'd be called something horrible, like an isolationist. If I said yay, I'd be a rhino hawk. If I said give Iran $1 billion or $2 billion of your tax dollars, I'd be the first black president. And if I had a chocolate chunk ice cream while getting lost in the White House closet, I'd be Joe Biden. Am I buying the mainstream propaganda when I say this was the best action considering all the possibilities? No, it was the best option considering what was offered. I think it's crazy to say that we shouldn't have gotten involved, knowing full well that we've been involved over there, right or wrong. Thank the good Lord I haven't been in the Oval Office because, like I said before, we might all be dead at this point. Here's what I think. I think both the Mike Pence types, that's a tough name to say right now, Mike Pence, but Mike Pence types in your government and the mainstream media and the libertarians were all hoping this would escalate to prop up each of their own talking points. And it's much easier to talk, believe me. I'm sitting here talking, but I'm not dodging shrapnel in a bomb shelter. But that hasn't happened yet. Does Israel hold too much of our government interests in the Middle East? Yeah, sure. Does the defense industry hold too much of our government interests around the world? Yeah, sure. Does the media? Of course they do. Does the Iranian government hate us? Yeah, and sadly, probably rightfully so, from the standpoint of our meddling in their affairs since at least the 1950s. But like most of you who are listening, I'm guessing, you didn't vote for Joe Biden, but you still had to live in his Captain Underpants version of the American dream for 4 years. Perfect example would be Ukraine. Did anyone you know call for that over there in that country? The gifting of endless amounts of money to a crazed RuPaul cokehead like Zelensky? Probably not. So, in an effort to chew gum and walk at the same time, I'll say that most people, including the 90+ million Iranian citizens occupying that country, probably just want to go to work and raise their families. But I also don't think they crave a Western-style democracy. I'm sure some are black-pilled or white-pilled or just pilled, but I don't think they're red, white, and blue-pilled. You know, the ones that are shaped like a rocket? That's what I think. And I think that the small clip that went viral of Trump using an expletive was more than just a sign of his frustration in the Middle East currently. I must have watched that 50 times, and each time I came away with a different feeling. One of which being the thought to ask you all if you've ever read 1984 by George Orwell, real name Eric Blair, you'll notice that class divisions, if you've ever read that, are a necessity. Someone always has to be poor. You need a middle class, and then you have the elites. But by definition then, that means that you or I don't exist without someone standing guard at the gate. Unless you think borders are just imaginary lines that were fought with imaginary lives. Now, I understand that that's different than actively engaging in dropping bombs, but can we all agree as adults that some foreign wars have been morally just? Now again, before I lose you all to claiming I'm a war hawk, a rhino, I'm in a Trump cult, whatever, let me give some difficult facts. Facts that don't exist in a vacuum. It is a fact that Peter Thiel, of Palantir fame, was at least partially responsible for the rise of J.D. Vance. That's true. He actually mentioned Vance did AI just after the ceasefire, while on Fox News with Bret Baier. Vance, as we're now being told, was key in this agreement, this ceasefire agreement, which would explain the Cheshire Cat grin in said interview. The idea had been all along to get the Iran conflict to crash the incoming Trump economy. I mentioned a similar thing in the previous podcast, that a crash was coming. And I never thought I'd say this, but I actually agreed with Glenn Beck's assessment and his commentary in a recent episode of Piers Morgan, in which he told the story of meeting with W, Baby Bush, during the Iraq War, and how Bush told him that it didn't matter who sat in the chair of the presidency. The same voices are still the ones calling the shots. It's almost asinine to think we shouldn't have gotten involved in the sense that we've been over there. We've always been over there. Trump bombed Syria last term. He bombed Afghanistan last term, I think. Check that and let me know. But I don't agree completely that Iran was an immediate threat, and I don't necessarily think we should have bombed them. This wasn't the moment that Trump finally looked presidential. This wasn't a brave act on behalf of the commander-in-chief, as the news will say. But by virtue of that, and because apparently now there are questions surrounding how far back this pushed the Iranians from gaining a nuke, it cannot be called a disaster. What is stopping me from calling this a catastrophe that will plunge us into another forever war is simply time. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I made my peace with Trump's ties when COVID happened. I realized at that point that every conspiracy has a 0-point convergence that I could no longer ignore. Biometrics, AI, open borders, crashed economy, foreign conflict, that was all going to happen one way or the other. This isn't 500-dimension chess or whatever ridiculous nonsense some might say. Stevie Wonder could have seen what was coming, giving the shutdown of the American economy. I said at least a year ago in one of my reports that World War III with China was not even a remote possibility. I'll eat those words if it happens, but it would be to no one's benefit if it does. Same as this thing we're talking about now. Why didn't Russia help Iran? Or China? Or anyone that we know of anyway? And I only say that because of the cargo planes from China that were sent into Iran. But if you don't like the current regime, if you think Iran is a threat, if you don't want sleeper cells here, just recognize that our government, going back decades, created this mess plain and simple. Regardless of money or PACs or whatever helped Trump to get the office of the presidency once again, remember, they all take money. Neocons will always be on the side of war. They'll always have his ear. And anyone else who sits on the big white telephone. Stop acting as if you don't have a voice or a choice to elect the person with the least amount of ties to the CIA. Trump attended the Wharton School of Business, which to some conspiracy theorists online is apparently, allegedly, a known CIA recruitment hangout. Let's call it that, a hangout. He is allegedly a cousin of Hillary. In a book published long before anyone else said it, Trump said that the US would go to war, this was in the 90s, that we would go to war with a man named Bin Bin, and the excuse would be a planned attack on the Twin Towers. Look it up. And how would you know that? But let me ask again, would you take his presidency over that of Obama or Biden? I would. Straight up. I don't care for Chucky Piehead as VP and would have preferred someone else, but that's life, trying to weigh the least worst options. And really, my friends, that's what this show right now is all about. I also could have titled it The Options We Were Given. But not as catchy, right? I can name 10 things right now that I didn't care for that Trump did going back to 2016. I think we all can if we're being honest with ourselves, but are we or are we not in a cult? Can we be critical of him in public when the possibilities exist for you to get beat down, or seemingly give the upper hand or something to the blue hairs? How about this? I don't give a jackrabbit's tail about what anyone thinks. Do I want war? No. Do I feel safer now? No. But war is a reality in this jacked up world, and I do feel safer with Trump at the helm. All of us could have been a Thomas Massie up to this point. All of us could have been a Ron Paul up to this point. It's easier than ever, especially now with the internet. But the real kablooey that's coming isn't on another country. It'll be here. And the sound that you hear will be the national debt going bust when other countries stop buying it. To that point, I encourage you to catch at least some of the Theo Von interview with Thomas Massey. Say what you want about Theo and all that, but, Massey, he likens the debt to virtual reality. Because no one can really seem to grasp the concept. And speaking of virtual reality, and I wanted to hit this point too, think of your favorite video game. Or whatever game is on your phone. We've all played one. Everyone's played one at one time. Now imagine playing that same game every single day for the last 15 years to prep for an acute attack on another country's bunkers. That's what we did. J.D. Vance said it himself. And yes, look, credit to the pilots and the military. I've never served in the military, but look, you break it, you bought it, as the old saying goes. And since we made it, we're going to use it. So we drop a bomb on top of a Coke can from way up high in the sky. Why? Because we can. Your tax dollars hard at work. And no one cared up until this point. And really no one probably cared because Israel wasn't involved. Now that Israel's involved, everyone seems to care. And it's hard to argue against that point, isn't it? This country, the one that you and I live in, is completely, totally infiltrated, compromised, in debt, to the point of no return, and no one cares. It's not clickable. It's not user-friendly. There's no new model to replace this one. We woulda, coulda, shoulda, and nobody did. COVID was the template. I watched, and still do, as everyone walked around like Bubble Boy. People still do it. I still see people wearing masks in their car, alone, driving alone. Bud Light is still in business. And yet you're the one getting jammed in the business. They'll never tell you that. I will. I did a report on nearly every major world leader and how all of them had some form of media training, whether it be theater, movies, television, radio, whatever. I did a report on government plans to block out the sun, for God's sake. The FBI labeled Christians and Trump supporters as homeland threats. And who won the popular vote again? No one I know acted like Rambo when 2020 hit. In fact, for most people, things got a lot worse. Debt, domestic violence, violent crime, you name it. We didn't win a culture war. We're getting smacked around on the court like Caitlin Collins, looking at the ref going, what's going on? We don't have a gig economy. We have a giggity economy. Join my OF, by the way. That's a joke. That's a joke. But speaking of that, we're not reproducing fast enough as a species, even if the Christian right is rising again in the West. They, you know who they are, by the way, are poisoning us. Air, food, water, land. I sound like Cat Williams from way back. This has been known. So at this point, maybe the best thing we can do is sit back and pray this doesn't escalate, sure. Because the future ain't what it used to be, friends. Pray that your skin doesn't melt when the ish hits the fan. In one way and only one way, because I don't want war. Nobody wants world war, especially. I don't want people dying. I don't want Americans dying. I don't want Iranians dying. I don't want Israelis dying. But maybe World War III would be a welcome change in the sense that we'd finally wake up to the reality that some people do hate us, right or wrong. I'm not going to do the whole, if you're really America first, but if you're really America first, I lied, you wouldn't be complaining online about a potential socialist mayor in New York. You would have noticed this coming. and maybe done more to campaign or petition or call to get the right person in there, even if it is on the other side. And look, the Candace Owenses of the world, let's use her as an example. They're on the right track. But she could stand to do some homework on a few issues, as we all could, admittedly. But, and I've said this before, I'm not here to save the country with this. I'm busy. I have 2 jobs. I go to 2 martial arts academies. I'm busy. I don't need this necessarily. And I'm not saying Candace does this, but all these people telling you that you're a patriot if you subscribe to their channel online is selling you a load of Bolshevik. We're going to war. We've been at war for a very long time. Most of those I see commenting now, they only heard of Mossad 2 months ago. The Great Awakening that everyone was talking about was waking up from a coma. Need I say more about the 1990s? I've commented on that many, many times. Remember when rock bands were the scapegoat for all government actions? I'd gladly take that time back and bury my head in the sand, but what did that do? There are all kinds of PACs that influence our foreign policy, not just a PAC. $3 billion to Israel is a spit in the bucket to what our debt is every year. I mean, I'm glad we're having this conversation now, and that many more people are aware, but we created this Frankenstein monster, and he's currently setting fire in more places than just the Middle East at this very moment. So, as the old saying goes, pray for peace, but prepare for war. Not just in the Middle East, but maybe one day right here. That's the game, right? That's what they want. They want us fighting. A war can never really be civil. And it's not just the MAGA crowd. I don't buy into that. I don't think the MAGA crowd is split. I think the people that are... Look, don't be so quick to cut and run on the agenda coined America First. With policies that hold up a mirror to the hearts of most Americans and reflect what's been inside for a very long time. It's a place where you can worship how you like, get a decent education, have a roof over your head, and a meal every day, with a way to process those who are looking for a better life. Oh look, I sound like a politician. But they talk like that because they know that is the ideal. They know that. But this, with Trump, still is and has been our best shot. Gone as our government may be to achieving this for us, we're told we have rights that we can exercise. You just have to be willing to exercise. One of you once reminded me that they take the Trump presidency for just one day over the last 4 years of Joe Biden. And I couldn't agree more. So thanks for listening. Comment if you want. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. See you sooner than later. Talk soon.
Go to JamesAnthonyReport.com or click the link in the description to support our sponsors. James Anthony Report was made possible by garbage-ass people like you. Thank you.